I can begin talking while he's working with the computer. I had it wasn't a PowerPoint, it's with my Apple program, and I think that's the problem, but make this up right now. There it is.
I'm working on it.
And but let me just say about that, it's encountering a life's crisis. I'm not going to be talking about solving life's crisis. I think that I make that very clear to start with. And also very clear that I've chosen 3 of the crises that I faced in my lifetime. And the final one is the death of Naomi. Are we ready to go here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll move back over here then.
Yeah.
Now, can the people online also see this, what I'm seeing here?
They're seeing what's on the screen.
Okay. I thought it would be interesting if you'd see a little bit of my family, of where I come from, out of which helps to make me who I am. I hope we all understand that. This is called family systems, and that system was very important to me in growing up. Now, on the screen, you see on the left-hand side, there's a picture of my father and mother. You see that, and the 4 children. And Mary Jane, you hardly can see her. It's Paul, the top one, my brother Paul, and then my sister Ruth, and Mary Jane, and myself. Do you see which one's me? And then my father and mother. Now, I don't remember exactly when that picture was taken, but I think it was this. We were traveling in an old Essex car, going down to Harrisonburg, Virginia, to visit my mother's sister. And we stopped along the way. We stopped quite often along the way. In fact, we had flat tires, and you'd get them out, you'd put a patch on them and put them back on again. And that was the occasion. Now, the middle picture there you see is, there we are, I'm a bit older there in that one. As again, it's Paul and Ruth and Mary Jane. Let me tell you who they are. My brother Paul, do any of you remember him at all? Some of you do. He was a graduate of Goshen College, was very active in the Mennonite Church as far as the Sunday school materials are concerned in Scottsdale. My sister Ruth, she and her husband lived and were part of the older class when it was going on. We are now the older class.
Yeah.
And do you remember Ruth and Phil that lived here and that's Ruth, and then the final one is me. And there we are now as adults, and then you see the 4 of us together. Now, the first story I'd like to tell, let me just go through this quickly. The top left-hand column is my father and my mother. My father was a banker, and my mother was sort of carried the religious ethic for our family. She was, well, anyway, they were appointed when they first got married to be the superintendents of the mission in Norristown. And they appointed my father to be the superintendent, the conference did. But I know, and everybody else knew, that my mother was the superintendent, but they couldn't appoint her. My father was a banker. He went across the bridge to Bridgeport, and my mother took care of the church. In fact, even some Sundays, when they couldn't get somebody from the conference to come down to preach, my mother would speak. Not behind the pulpit, hear me, but she would speak from the floor. Now, see, that's sort of a metaphor for my mother all through her life. In fact, on her dying bed, I'll make this quickly, on her dying bed, my sister Mary Jane said to my mother, if you had been born now, follow me in that, you would be a minister. And she opened her eyes and said emphatically, I was a minister. The last Sunday she was in church at Salford, they invited her to come forward to speak. They were going to Rock Hill Home, and Willis Miller said she was going to talk down where the song leaders do, and he said, no, come up behind the pulpit. And her last time in church, she was behind the pulpit at Salford Church. That's my mother. Down below is my grandfather, John F. Federoff, Letterock, and he was kind of dapper. You notice that? That was before he was a Mennonite, but that was before they had all those restrictions in the churches in those early days. And he was quite dapper. In fact, they had a trolley that went through town. He was president of that trolley. He had a store in the corner of the Letterock and ran it, had somebody else run it, or he ran it. And that was my grandfather, John F. Letterock. I could tell more about that. But let me just say one other thing. In the bottom right-hand corner, that's my high school year in high school at Harrisonburg, Virginia. And the 4 people, see if you recognize those people. Any of you recognize? I'm the first one. Looks like old legs, doesn't it? And the next one is Bob Johnson. Bob Johnson was a pastor at the Sojourner church when he died, and I went to the funeral service. He has a son that works at the Mission Network. I think is he working there now, John?
He's soon to retire.
He's soon to retire. He looks just like him. And the other two, do you remember? Do you know who they are? Bob and Bill Detweiler. And the first one that's looking right at us is Bob. No, is Bill. And the one looking away is Bob. And Bob was the pastor here at the congregation for many years. Now, encountering my struggles, getting back to where it affects me, I'm going to speak of three things that I face, but I have many crises. I could talk about some things that when I was a minister, I was overseer or bishop, ordained bishop, quite young, of several churches, and there was many crises happened then. It seemed like every decade, the Mennonite church goes through something that we have to deal with. And mine, I could just name a few of them, like charismatic movement. I was judged not even being spiritual because I didn't go along with all of that. Divorce and remarriage fits into there also. All of these crises were going on, and if you had leadership in the congregation, then you had to deal with some of those things. The divorce and remarriage was a very serious one. But I'm going to be talking about crises in my life primarily. And the ones I'm going to be talking about, my early childhood experience and the events around Naomi's mastectomy and the final days of her life. Okay, here we go. I was standing on the front porch. I was about the age here in this picture with my mother. We lived in Trooper. And she said to me, looked at me straight and said to me, John, if Luke hadn't died, we wouldn't have you. Now, I could have, as a child, taken that in two different ways. One way I could have said, boy, that really stuck with me, and I really would have liked to have Luke. Now, what I put there is I had in my possession, I have that little thing that my father wrote out and mailed out the day after Luke was born. See what it says? Mother and baby doing, I think it's fine. A day or two later, he died. He was, they called it in those days, what did they call it? I forget. Anyway, something was wrong with the blood and the circulation. And he died in 2 days. And that card was sent out before he died. Now, my mother said to me, if Luke hadn't died, and there's the tombstone, by the way, with Luke's name on it. Yes. You see that? 1924, he'd be like 98 today if he would have been living. She said, and I'll repeat it again, if Luke hadn't died, we wouldn't have you. Now, I took that to say, Luke died, and they have me. Isn't that wonderful? I didn't take it, whoa, boy, we're sort of stuck with you now. You follow me the difference in that? And I think that little story illustrates a little bit of how I lived my life. I always sort of thought and saw that the cup was half full, not half empty. And when we dealt with crises, as I was the one that usually would say, well, we can get through this, it'll be okay. It's disappointing, but it's okay. And Naomi, in contrast, held on to those things much longer. And she would sometimes accuse me of saying, well, let me have my dad for a while. Why can't I? And I think that it all dates back to that early childhood experience and how I responded to that. And that gave a little bit of a metaphor of how I responded later on in life. Well, then the second one, and I want to go rapidly through these because we have time for discussion. The events around Naomi's mastectomy. It was about 1974, I think it's 74. Let's see it here. And her right breast had fibrocystic disease. And we went through about 4 times where they went in there and they took out a little cyst. And her breast was getting more deformed all the time. And so on the last one, when they said it was again, they need to check whether it was cancerous or not. See, a lot of people thought because of this story that I'm telling you now that Naomi had cancer in those early days. She did not. It was fibrocystic disease. And we went to a surgeon in Wichita. And she signed the certificate for the surgery, and it wasn't a bilateral mastectomy. It was her right breast only that she signed he would take off. And when she woke up in the room, the recovery room, she discovered that, I'm going to read her own words. I copied this down so you'd have it in her words. The surgery is now completed, and she doesn't know what happened, and this is what happened in the recovery room. Waking from the fog, this is Naomi talking, by the way, not me. Waking from the fog of anesthesia, I faintly heard the words, the nurse beside me saying, the bilateral mastectomy is ready to go back to her room. The sentence dug into my hazy brain as I struggled to understand what was happening. I sat upright on the gurney and shouted, that's not me. The room was filled with silence. I turned to the nurse saying, that's not me. I received no answer and slipped back into unconsciousness. Over the next hours in the recovery room, my nightmare continued. When I came back to the room, I was devastated. None of the nurses' staff would talk to me about the operation. They refused to tell me even the simplest information about my blood pressure or medication. The doctor was even less helpful. However, he followed, when he came to the room, but he was always followed by entourage of residents and interns and said nothing about the procedure. Well, to make that long story short, she had to deal with the fact now that both of her breasts were gone. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Naomi. She was in some ways a proud woman. She was a beautiful woman. And she liked her body the way it was. And suddenly, as she looked down across herself, she didn't have anything. And so it was decided to go back and put implants. I tell this part because it relates to the next story of her death. We went back into surgery again, and this time, the purpose was to open again the surgery, the cutting and put implants in both of the breasts. The only person that really talked to her there in the hospital in Wichita was one of the ladies that were mopping the floor. And just before she went down on the gurney to the surgery for the second time, this lady turned to Naomi and held her shoulder, put her hand on her shoulder, and said, Miss Naomi, everybody knows what happened to you. And I want to tell you, you go right down there and you believe that Jesus is right with you when you go. Those were the words, the only words of encouragement that she received during those days in the hospital. The implants were put in, and she lived with that the rest of her life. Until, by the way, I adding just a piece to that story. I was in the waiting room waiting for her to come out of surgery, and the doctor came out to me, and he said, what did you think Naomi was going to have surgery for? And I said, to have her right breast removed. And he turned and walked away and didn't say anything else. That was my only encounter with him there. Now, getting to our third crisis, and that's when she began to become, well, I might say about what you see in the screen. Maybe some of you saw this was in Christian Living magazine, where Naomi wrote the story, and that's a picture of her during that time. Now, I'm going to be talking now about the early days of her illness and how that this even was part of leading up to this crisis that we face. in the last year, in fact, early part of the summer, she was well enough that we had talked about going back to Ocean Grove for the last time. Ocean Grove is where we had vacation for years with my family. And we thought that maybe as the summer progressed, like in August, maybe we could drive back and be there by the sea. She loved that. I thought that sea air would be good for her. But she began losing weight rapidly during those early days. And then we began to say, well, what can we do? You know, she was a nurse, and nurses always have answers to intervention. They always have answers that health and getting better and being well is the result. And so we began the journey. One doctor said that maybe these implants that you received back in 1970, 76, 78, maybe one of them's leaking, and that's causing now why your body is reacting the way it is. So we went to a doctor here in town, and he looked at her over at the women's clinic, and after examining her, he said, no, we don't do that. We don't take them out. That was devastating for her. If it was leaking, why wouldn't you? And so Dr. Yoder said to us, a family doctor, he said, well, we'll make an appointment with a plastic surgeon over in South Bend, which we did. And he examined her and said, yes, we can take them out. And so she went through surgery again to remove those implants after 38 years. And now when she came out of surgery, she was completely flat across the front. Her body was thin, getting thinner all the time. But you know, that didn't change anything when the implants were gone. Then we thought maybe a pacemaker would help. And so we went that direction. That didn't change anything. But her loss of weight, her fully, and was, let me just say that her father died of a lung condition, and we always thought that maybe it's because he raised chickens in the broiler house, and that was the reason. But only to discover that she had alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Now that's a genetic thing, and it's passed on from mother to children. And then from male to female, from female to male, back and forth. And Naomi was diagnosed with this alpha-1 genetic problem. That's probably the reason why her father died at 82. But we realized that there came a point in Naomi's journey toward death that she realized that she was not going to live. And that changed our relationship completely at that point. We now can talk about that. What might it mean to die? Her mind to the very end was clear. She never suffered from a dementia part. She was very clear in her thinking. So we could talk about this. And we discussed it. The children, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren came in one by one and knelt beside her bed, held her hand, and they both wept. They wept. I remember Zeb, some of you might know who Zeb is. He's Philip and Lisa's child, adopted from Cleveland, Ohio. I could not forget, he was kneeling beside her bed and just weeping. And Naomi was holding him. She was losing weight. I think she weighed about 94 pounds. She stopped eating for the last 17 days. I would say to her, do you want more food? Do you want something? And she'd say no. And finally, with all of the family around her, on Saturday evening, on July the 24th, she breathed her last breath. That night, we called Indiana University, and they came and picked her up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And the two ladies that came from Indiana University were wonderful. They sat with us around the table, and we talked. I had written up a sheet of paper that said who Naomi was and what she had done in her lifetime, and put it with the body when they took it down to Indiana University. One of the last things that Naomi did in that last week, she told the family, all of them were here, all the children are there, and their spouses. She said, I want you to have a meal together. And so from her bedroom, she gave instructions of what they ought to do, what tablecloth to put down, what china to put on the table, What silverware to use, what goblets to put on the table. And Beth would take pictures up and bring it back to her, and she'd say, yes, that's right. And then I sat with her as we heard the family off in the distance having their last meal together when their mother's alive. A day later, she died. Like I said, the last gift that she gave to the medical world was her body. That note that I wrote went with the body. I put in your chair how the young are taught. I want to say a word about that, and also a word about our theological discussions with Naomi before she died. You know, you might not agree with me about this, but this is my journey with this. If you believe in a flat earth, like the New Testament was written, believing in a flat earth, but there's still some people in the world that still believe this, the earth is flat. I don't know how they can. And then you believe that everything below the earth is evil, so it's down, that's where hell must be. Everything above the earth is above that big dome that you see, that's where heaven would be. I often think about that when I ride my trike. I look up and I can sort of envision what they saw in this big dome in the sky. And above that was everything good. It was God. And so I would say to Naomi, you know, Jerusalem's not the center of the world. And up is not all good and down all evil. Our world is round, we know that. And so your resurrection, Naomi, and my resurrection will be in the lives of those people that we have touched during our life. Naomi, all of those classes you taught, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, those people that we dealt with as couples who found new life in their marriage. Remember you, that's your resurrection. I said, that will be mine. And I could assure her at that point that I'm not far behind. My age, and she was 88 when she died. She would be 89 next month. I'm 89, I'll be 90 next birthday. So I'm not far behind. So I leave this with you and put it on your chair. That Wendell Berry said, what we read together, Wendell Berry's books, we would read sometimes the whole book together, each other, night to night. In the last prayer we would pray over the last months at our dinner table, when she was still coming out to eat with me there, and back in the bedroom, and at night, we would pray what Meister Eckhart said, that if you pray one prayer in your lifetime, be sure that it's thank you. And so our prayer for those last year and last months and last days was the word thank you. This is what Wendell Berry said. I tremble with gratitude for my children and their children who take pleasure in one another. At our dinner table, at our dinners together, the dead enter and pass among us in living love and memory. And so the young are taught. I'm going to show you one more picture. That's almost at the end. And there Naomi is caring for me. Her final week together, Naomi died October 22, 1932. She was born in 1921. Well, that's my story. And that's a major crisis that I face. And I still, when I walk in the house and it's empty, I say to myself, Naomi, where are you? Where are you? When I ride my trike, and there's a place on the campus that's that sidewalk that goes directly across to a hospital. You'd see it. The trees on the campus make like a cathedral. I would encourage you to walk that sometime. And when I ride my bike, I'm in my cathedral, and I can talk to Naomi. I can recognize that I live my life now. And it's all changed. I still see it, the cup. Is that full? It's not empty. Well, that's my story. I would open it for any discussion. We have time. I didn't want to take the full hour. I wanted to open up for you. What has your journey been like? What would you like to say? Even the people online that you like to call in and talk in, you can do that. Those pictures that you see on the screen in front of you show the aging process. Anybody have anything you'd like to say? Yeah, John.
Did you have any more stories about how the children and grandchildren responded to Naomi at the end when they all came by?
You know, it was they came one at a time, and they usually knelt beside her bed, and she'd reach out and hold them, and they'd talk. Like I said, her mind was clear, so she could talk to them, and she did. But they were very emotional. And that's what sort of, in my mind, was very clear, that Naomi's resurrection is now in the lives of people who are around her. And I was seeing it happen right there in front of me.
So sort of this poem was happening right there.
Right there. And the one where she gave instructions for everybody to eat around the table. It was like a Christological thing that he was calling his people together for one final meal. And here she was back in her bed, giving instructions for this final meal. Thank you for that. You know, that's
Could I ask a question of John?
yes.
It's
Who's-
Brian Cruz here from Northern Ireland.
Oh, Brian Cruz. You know, let me tell him who you are. Brian is a rector of the Church of Ireland. And during my years in Ireland, we were very close to Brian and his wife and family. Welcome, Brian. You may talk. Yes. What do you have to say?
Thank you, John. I just want again to echo the thoughts of what you're saying about an aspect of Naomi's resurrection. You and I, we talk on the phone a lot about these things, and I know your journey of thought in that area. And I just wanted to make sure, just in case anybody's in any doubt about the teamwork of you and Naomi in Ireland. Personally, Charlene and I benefited so much from your love and care when Charlene had the breast cancer, to the hospitality that you showed us, and our children who are very young when you met them. Both you and Naomi have influenced their lives so much. And the one thing that has stuck with me, amongst many, many memories, was that night that you came to my church and you and Naomi did your marriage talk with the rope and with the napkin, and the impact that you had, both of you, on our people, and Charlene and I as well. We wept and wept as well whenever we read the email. But the prayer that you sent me, and also you've mentioned today, that prayer of thanksgiving, is something that for me is rudimentary, in that life happens, and as Christians, how we respond to life happening shows authenticity, I believe. And John, I just wanted to speak to say thank you for your love and care. Thank you for your time and sharing. And we miss Naomi. so much. So I can only imagine what you're doing. And yet, here you are being able to share and be positive and again enrich our lives and understanding. It's been a privilege to know you, and I look forward to our next phone call.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for your friendship, for your love. Yes.
I also want to thank you for sharing this very personal moments from your life. I'm wondering what you found especially helpful from the personnel that came from Indiana University to claim Naomi's body. I think I got the message that they were helpful when they arrived.
Well, it was two ladies. And when they first arrived, they sat down with all of my children were there and their spouses were able to be there. We sat around the kitchen table, our dining room table, and they talked about the process of what was going to happen. And they were very considerate of us. It was a very tender moment for all of us, and a lot of weeping, the last moments before she died. And then they said, well, you all stay here at the table, we'll go in, and we'll take the body and put it in the gurney. And they had a shroud that they put around her, and all you could see was her face. And we all gathered around that before they wheeled her to the car. And had our final moments together and weeping of saying goodbye to Naomi. And that was the last we saw of her. I think it's really nice to think that the nurse in Naomi is that her last big gift that she can give to her profession is her body to help to train medical people. They now, when they're finished, I just hope that note that I wrote and put on the body, I hope that went with her to the interns. I have no way of knowing if it did or not. And they will cremate the body, and there'll be a special service down in Indianapolis, and we'll be invited to go to that. And I'll be glad to get and pick up the ashes at that time. I would just say one other thing about myself is that our lives, Naomi's and my life, sort of merged in everything that we did through the decades of our marriage. When I was a pastor, she was right there beside me all the time. I always used to joke to her and tell her that people loved Naomi and tolerated me. And I think there's something to that. And then when we were doing the teaching, we would walk together to our classrooms and to my office and her office. We did it together. We talked about it each day, what she was doing, what I was doing. And then our therapy times in Phil Haven, all of those hours were together. And then going to Belfast, Northern Ireland, like Brian was saying, it was not just me, it was a togetherness. And so that now is gone from me. And that's a profound loss. But the memories are there. When I ride my bike, my trike, it's a good time for me to talk to her. It's a pretty one-way conversation, I have to imagine what she might say. But one thing I say when I walk into the house, I usually say, Naomi, where are you? When my favorite theologian, when he died, Barbara Brown Taylor said in his funeral service, we have insufficient knowledge. We don't know. Our knowledge of what's coming beyond this is insufficient. We don't know. But we choose to mark our knowing, and I choose to believe that Naomi is somewhere, and it's okay. I don't know where. But I choose to believe that. I don't know it for sure. It was Marcus Borg Barbara Brown Taylor said that about. He had, even though he was a great theologian, he died with insufficient knowledge. And that's true of all of us.
Rachel Hartzler has a question.
I'd like to commend John on sharing. Thank you very much. You made yourself vulnerable, telling us these very private and personal things. And I think it's important to tell our stories. Some of us can tell it out loud in groups like this. Others of us need to tell it more privately. But telling our stories of loss helps to make it more real, and I think helps us process the grief that we all suffer when loved ones die. So I commend you, and I thank you for naming the remaining questions that you have. You're living with mystery, and there is so much of that in life and especially in death. So thank you for what you have given to us. It truly is a gift, John.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. It is true that we have insufficient knowledge. And we choose what we're going to do with that insufficient knowledge. And I choose to have faith to believe that there's something out there. That's what I choose to do, even with my insufficient knowledge. Yes.
Evelyn Kreider, when she was with Lawrence on his deathbed, asked him what he's expecting beyond death. He said, I really don't know, but whatever it is, it will be good.
Good response. Yes.
I very much can relate to a number of the things that you're saying, John. For one, Mel, it was very important for Mel to give his body to science, and now he took care of all of that. And so we had the experience of the person coming and being so gentle and caring, and gave me the chance to put that final cover over his head. But when we talk about what is ahead, we have lost two sons. Our oldest son died when he was 5. Mel was with him at the time and carried that, even though there was not a speck of guilt there or blame. But he carried that. And that was in 1960. And then our son that was born after Bobby died was Jamie. And that, of course, brought joy into our lives again. Jamie died in 2004 at age 43. So as I was there with Mel, just right up beside him, it took about a few days that he wasn't responding. But I was beside him and I kept telling him, Mel, you and I have walked together 64 and a half years. And now I will stay here. You will go on. And you will see Jesus. This is a comfort to me. And then you will hear and see Bobby coming, calling Daddy, Daddy. And Jamie will be there also. So that is, I don't know, but that's what I need as comfort for
That's good. Listens to you. We each have our own ways of responding.
Thank you, John, very much for your candor, your honesty, your spiritual education.